If you are a former Jehovah's Witness, what you are about to see may be difficult, because these are things you were never allowed to check for yourself. And if you have never had anything to do with this organization, stay with me, because you are about to hear the story of a man who did not know Greek, who sold miraculous wheat, declared a scam by a court of law, and who believed that the Egyptian pyramids could predict the future. And yet he built a system that today controls the lives of over 8 million people around the world. But that is not even the most important part. There is one mechanism that makes people afraid to leave, even when they no longer believe. And I will show you that mechanism in just a moment. Chapter 1. Russell. It starts innocently enough. The year is 1870. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. An 18-year-old son of a clothing merchant starts a small Bible study group. His name is Charles Taze Russell. He has no theological education. He never completed seminary. No church ever ordained him. And yet he begins calling himself pastor. And people believe him. This is the first warning sign. Authority with no verifiable qualifications. Russell grew up in an Adventist tradition, an environment obsessively focused on predicting the end of the world. And he inherited that method. He just changed the dates. 1874. The invisible return of Christ. Nothing happens. So Russell says it did happen. Just invisibly. Impossible to verify. Impossible to disprove. 1878. The resurrection of the saints. Nothing. 1914. The end of the times of the Gentiles and the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. Russell preached this for decades in his magazine Zion's Watchtower. 1914 arrives. World War I breaks out. And Russell does something very important. He does not admit a mistake. He changes the interpretation. He says the war is proof that he was right all along. Stop for a moment. Because this is not an error. This is a pattern. The prophecy fails, and so its meaning changes. Every single time. But this is still not the worst of it. In 1912, Russell sells his followers something called miracle wheat. He claims it produces 16 times more grain than ordinary wheat. The price? $60 per bushel, when the market price was $1. The case went to court. The court ruled it was fraud. The man who claimed to speak on behalf of God was selling his followers a product that a court of law declared a scam. And there is still more. In 1913, during a defamation trial, Russell testifies under oath that he knows Greek. The attorney asks him to read a Greek text from the New Testament. Russell cannot do it, and he admits that in open court. This is the man at the origin of the entire story. But the real transformation is still coming, because the man who will take power after his death will not be improvising. He will build a system.
Chapter 2. Rutherford, 1916. Russell dies on a train on his way back from a speaking tour across America. And then Joseph Franklin Rutherford appears. He calls himself judge. But in reality, that title comes from a single occasion when he filled in for a local district court judge. He was never an appointed judge. He was a lawyer with ambitions. Within just a few months, he does something that looks more like a corporate coup than a religious succession. 7 of the 8 directors of society try to remove him from power. Rutherford reinterprets the company charter, declares their election invalid, and removes all 7 of them. The revolt is crushed within weeks. This is not theology. This is cold organizational politics. And now the real transformation begins. Russell had allowed local congregations a degree of independence. Rutherford ends that. He introduces a centrally controlled model. Every congregation subordinated to the Watchtower Society. Every member required to submit weekly activity reports, forms, quotas, statistics. The organization starts to look like a sales corporation, not a community of faith. And then comes the year 1925. Rutherford announces that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will return to the earth. He writes an entire book about it. The title is Millions Now Living Will Never Die. And then he does something that sounds like absurdity, but actually happened. He built them a house. In San Diego, California. It is called Beth Sarim, the House of Princes. Officially, it is property of the society, reserved for the returning Old Testament patriarchs. 1925 arrives. No one returns. So who is living in the house? Rutherford, alone. While ordinary witnesses walk door to door and give their money to the organization, he lives in a villa in sunny California. Beth Sarim exists to this day. The society quietly sold it in 1948. You can find it in the San Diego County property records. And now, one detail the organization never mentions. Rutherford builds Beth Sarim during Prohibition in the United States. When his estate is inventoried after his death in 1942, the records include significant quantities of alcohol. The man who preached modesty and sacrifice. But all of this is just a background, because now we come to the most important part, the mechanism that makes the system work to this day.
Chapter 3. The mechanism. You need to understand one thing. This does not work like an ordinary religion. It works like a closed system. The first element, a monopoly on truth. The organization teaches that it is the only channel through which God communicates with humanity. Not the Bible directly, but the Bible as interpreted by the governing body. If the governing body changes an interpretation, that is not an error. That is new light. The principle is unbreakable. Every change in doctrine automatically becomes proof of faithfulness to God, not a mistake. Control the interpretation and you control reality. The second element, and this is the critical one, shunning. The official procedure is called disfellowshipping, formal expulsion from the congregation. It has existed since the time of Rutherford, but it was progressively tightened over decades. And it is not the expulsion itself that is most dangerous. The most dangerous part is the requirement to completely cut off contact with anyone who has been expelled, imposed even on the closest family members. Parents cannot speak to an adult child. Children cannot respond to parents. Spouses may be forced to choose. Stop and think about that. Would you leave a system if it meant losing everyone you love? This is not an accident. This is a designed retention mechanism. The cost of leaving must be so high that most people will never pay it. The third element, the prohibition on independent thinking. This is not a metaphor. Publications of the Watchtower Society have repeatedly and explicitly warned against independent thinking as something spiritually dangerous. Studying the Bible outside of society publications is discouraged. Reading critical material about the organization is forbidden, classified as apostate literature. In other words, the tools for verifying the truth are themselves declared off-limits. A person inside the system has no access to any external verification. The system closes in on itself. You cannot leave because you will lose everyone. You cannot check because it is forbidden. The fourth element, the blood doctrine. Stop here, because this is the most devastating consequence of this system. The ban on blood transfusions does not come from Russell or from Rutherford. This doctrine appears officially only in 1945, in a single article in the Watchtower. It was built on one passage in the Old Testament concerning the prohibition on consuming blood and extended to cover a total ban on medical transfusion procedures. No biblical text addresses surgical procedures. From 1945 to the present day, thousands of documented deaths. Among them the deaths of children whose right to medical treatment courts in many countries had to grant against the wishes of their own parents. A doctrine created by a committee in a single year on the basis of a single article, enforced as though it had always existed.
Chapter 4, 1975, the 1960s. Frederick Franz, the organization's chief theologian, develops a new chronology. His conclusion. The year 1975 marks the end of 6,000 years of human existence. The organization does not preach this quietly. It preaches it openly, at conventions, in literature, in door-to-door conversations. And people respond. They sell their homes. They leave their jobs. They do not go to university. They do not make pension plans. Why would they, when the new world is coming in 1975? 1975 arrives. And nothing happens. The organization stays silent for several years. Finally in 1980 the Watchtower publishes something resembling an apology. With one qualification. Part of the blame is placed on the witnesses themselves, who, and I quote, got too excited. Not we are sorry for spending decades proclaiming a false date. Just some people got too excited. Estimates suggest that between 300,000 and 400,000 people left the organization after 1975. People who had given the organization years of their lives, their money, their decisions about family and their children's education. No apology proportionate to that scale was ever offered. But many stayed, because the cost of leaving is too high. And that brings us back to the mechanism. Epilogue. For those who left. If you left this organization, whether voluntarily or through expulsion, what you feel has a name. Psychologists call it institutional trauma. The sense that your entire life was built on false foundations. That the people you loved are now on the other side of a wall. That is a real loss. Not imagination, not weakness. But there is one thing worth knowing. This system did not begin with God. It began with a man who did not know Greek and sold miraculous wheat for $60 a bushel. And with a second man who lived alone in a villa built for Abraham. This has a history. It has creators. It has a date of founding. It is not eternal. And everything that has a beginning can be left behind. Remember this. If truth is afraid of questions, it is not truth. Outro. If this material moved something in you, write in the comments. You do not have to agree with everything. It is enough that you start asking questions.